In this lab, we will discuss how to create Azure Application Gateway. This Azure Application Gateway is used in the reference architecture, which I am creating as part of this series. So in this episode, we are going to talk about how to create Azure Application Gateway using the Azure portal. And then we will look at how to create application gateway using the RM template, and then finally automate using the Azure DevOps CI/CD pipeline. So if you are new to the Azure Application Gateway, I would recommend you to go through the Microsoft documentation. So you can search Azure Application Gateway in the Google, and you will see the first link, what is the application gateway, and you will get enough documentation from the Microsoft MSDN documentation. So you can click on what is application gateway, try to understand about the application gateway requirement. I'm not talking about, I don't have any PPTs here to discuss the application gateway. Microsoft already created enough documentation on the application gateway, so it is always recommended to go through the Microsoft documentation rather than custom documentation created by somebody else. So let's take a look at the scenario. The scenario I have already documented. So part of this website, what I'm doing is this website is hosted in the Azure in a secure way. So in order to filter the security vulnerabilities, all the SQL injection, cross-site scripting. So to protect the web application common web vulnerabilities, I'm using my application gateway. And this is the website requirement. Based on the website requirement, I've already created the Azure blueprint. So the application gateway is actually sitting in front of my website, also my API gateway, which is the API management, and also all my app tier APIs. So I have a web tier, app tier, API management. All these backend tools are going to be protected by the application gateway. So that's the purpose of the application gateway. As I mentioned, if you are new to application gateway, you can look at the documentation videos. All the materials are available in the Microsoft MSDN portal. Now going back to Azure portal. So in order to, before creating the application gateway, I'm going to talk about the application gateway, which is already created before this, so that you will understand what is required for creating the application gateway. Point number one, you need to know what is the name of the application gateway. Make sure that you are following the MSDN, the Microsoft recommended naming conventions while creating any of the Azure resources. And you also need the public IP address. So here the traffic coming from the internet and pass through your DNS. Once the request is filtered by the DNS and understood the mapping, and it will be redirected to your public IP address of the application gateway. So here I have the public IP address, which is associated to this application gateway. So you need the public IP address, and then you need the resource group where you will be keeping this application gateway, then location and the subscription. So let's dig into the application gateway, which is already created. So I will walk through the application gateway, which is already created, and then create the application gateway using the Azure portal and also using the RM templates, and finally do the CI/CD. So you also need the VNet with the subnet where this application gateway is going to sit. For example, if you see here in my architecture, so there is a VNet and there is a separate subnet for each service. So this application gateway need a separate subnet within the VNet. So that's another requirement of the application gateway. As I mentioned, you need the public IP address, and you need to know which tier, the pricing tier of the application gateway you will be selecting. So the MSDN portal has all the details for the pricing tier. So let me quickly go to the pricing tier of the application gateway. So if you are new to the application gateway, so you can understand the pricing details here. So my application gateway has two pricing tiers. One is in V1 and V2. So there is the standard V1, V2, and web application firewall V2. So there are two things, right? These are two separate things in the application gateway. Application gateway is available under the standard tier, and application firewall, web application firewall, which is part of your application gateway. So you are basically having two things. One is an application gateway, and second one is the web application firewall, which is part of the application gateway. So in the V2, the new version of the application gateway supports auto scaling, zone redundance, static IP address, header rewrite. So all these details you can look into that, and some of the pricing tiers, and you can go to the understand the pricing details for application gateway going to the this MSDN portal. So back to the portal. Here you once you understand that which version of the WAF you are going to use, as I mentioned, while creating the application gateway, you need to know whether you want the standard tier of V1 or V2, and web application firewall V1 or V2. So those are the two requirements. And then while creating, you may want to know the tagging tags required for the application gateway. Then in the configuration, so here you have the standard V2 and the web application firewall V2, and then capacity type, whether auto scaling or the manual scaling, how many instances of application gateway you need, whether you want to enable HTTP2. So that's the based on your requirement, you can select HTTP2 or enable or disable. Then web application firewall configuration. So here is the pricing tiers I was talking about. Firewall status enabled, firewall mode, whether you want it in detection mode or the prevention mode. And then you can also have the backend pools. So these backend pools are going to be the backend apps, which will be protected here. So in my case, I have web tier API, a website, web app, and in the app tier, I have the APIs, and I can also keep the API management, and I can also keep the, if I have any VMs, virtual machines, so all of them can be part of the backend pools in the application gateway. So I'm going to start with website and then keep adding more and more backend pools in the same application gateway. So those are the configurations you will be doing here in the application gateway backend pools. So once you understand here, you will, if you look at the different types of backend pools you can configure, IP address or FQDN, you can fully qualified domain name, and virtual machines, and VMSS or app services. So in my case, I'm configuring my websites as backend pool. So I selected the app services. As soon as I select, I can see all my apps listed here. So once you save that, so this is a manual way of adding. Once you create the application gateway, you can add these backend pools. Now, these are the HTTP settings. You can have HTTP setting, HTTP traffic or HTTPS traffic. So when you configure the HTTPS, you need the SSL certificate. Make sure that you have the self-signed certificate or the certificate from the certificate authority before you configure the HTTPS. So just wanted to let you know that that's the one of the requirement part of the application gateway creation. If you are creating just with the port 80 default port, you don't need to have the certificate. So you will select the port 80. So I will go through those details, but this is a one of the requirement. I'm showing the existing application gateway so that you will understand what are the application gateway requirement before provisioning into the application gateway. So this is the front-end IP configuration. So I'm attaching the front-end IP address along with the listeners. So listeners are the backend either HTTP or HTTPS listener. So I for now I'm going with the port 80. That's the HTTP listener. I also added one rule here, and then finally the important thing is the backend health. So in order to make sure that when you attach the backend tool to the application gateway, so health of the backend service, if it is showing healthy, that means the backend tool attached to the application gateway properly. Otherwise, if you see, this is the critical part of creating the application gateway, attaching the backend tools and making sure that those backend tools are healthy when you are attaching the application gateway. Now let's take a look at creating the application gateway now. So now I'm assuming that you understand the basic requirements of the application gateway since you looked at the existing details. Now let's take a look at how to create the application gateway using the Azure portal. So in order to start creating the application gateway, click on the home page if you are new to the portal. So click on create. Under networking section, you can look for the application gateway. So as I mentioned, you can select the existing resource group or create the new resource group. So in my case, I've already created the resource group. I also created the virtual network because this application gateway is going to sit inside the existing virtual network. So let me give the name of the application gateway. Since I already have the application gateway 1 created, so I'll go with the second one. So I'm going to use the West US as my region, and I'm going with, as I mentioned, these are the different tiers. So you have a standard tier, which is V1, standard V2, WAP V1, and WAP V2. So I will be going with the WAP V2, which will be covered version 2. And whether I need auto scaling enabled, so I can go with auto scaling enabled, and minimum number of instances and maximum number of instances. So I'll start with 1. You can anytime modify this. So I will discuss more details even in the RM templates also, all these details. So firewall status, so I'll keep it enabled. Firewall mode, detection or prevention. So you can keep any of these. And then availability zone. So this is the HTTP2 or HTTP. So this is the networking. So I'm going to select the existing network. And then this is the subnet for the application gateway. So as part of the front end, I need to select the public IP address. If you are creating for the first time, so you can create the new public IP address. So this is already used for the one which I already created. So I need to create the new public IP address. So you can keep the public IP address name here. So as part of the naming conventions, all the resources, whatever the resource I'm going to create as part of this reference architecture series is already created. So I will be using this public IP address as per the naming convention. So let me select the public IP address and then select the backends. So I can add the backend tools even later, or I can add it right away. So this is the name of the backend tool. So I can say backend tool. I'm going with the app service. So let me select existing app. So this is my existing app. I can add more apps. So let me add one more app. So I want to protect these two websites using the application gateway from the web one. So I will say add. So I've added two two backend tools, and then next configuration. So you have the front end. So as part of the front end, by default, the public IP which I have created is already added. And then let me create a rule. So this is for adding the listeners. So what are my listeners? Listeners are HTTP listener and HTTPS listener. So I'll start with the HTTP listener, and in the next video probably I can go with the HTTPS listener. So HTTPS listener for the website is a little bit complicated because you need to buy a certificate, or you need to have a self-signed certificate and attach that self-signed certificate in the website, also in the application gateway. So that will take a little time. So I will start with only HTTP for now. So this is the routing rules. So I will call it as rule 1, or rule for HTTP. And then this is the listener name, HTTP listener. And then select the front end IP, which is the public. And then, as I mentioned, going with HTTP port 80, and then listener types. So I'm going with the basic, and I don't want error page here. Then backend targets. So the backend targets is the backend pool, which is created already. And then this is my HTTP settings, HTTP settings, not HTTPS. So cookie-based affinity and connection draining. So these are the different features application gateway support. So at this point, I'm going with disable request timeout when you are creating the backend pool. So the request timeout is 20 seconds. So override with existing host name. So I can say pick host name from the backend target. So depending on what you select, if you say override, you have to specify the name again. But I will depend on the backend pool which is already created instead of overriding the new one. And then say add. Then add. That's my routing rules. So the routing rules are added for this website. Then go with the back. So the backend tools are already added here. So the next is the tagging. I made another video on the tagging, for example, if you want to add approvers, for example. So I will skip for now. I've already created another video adding more and more taggings. So that's how you create the application gateway using the validation page and the details. So I think the reason why the validation is failed because the subnet name I've already used for the previous application gateway. So this subnet gateway you cannot assign the same subnet for two application gateway. So let me go back and create new subnet. So I would expect this to throw the error here upfront, but it's not throwing the error. So let me create another subnet. So I'm going to say 2. I will leave the default. So you see this SNet application gateway 001 already attached to the one of the application gateway. So that's why it will not allow using the same. So I'm going to use this subnet for the new application gateway. let's select the application gateway subnet, which is created now. So these details are already selected. So we already created front-end routing rules, back-end rules, and tags, and then finally hope the validation should be working as expected. So what is the issue now? So this time error seems to be because I selected the auto scaling. The valid value in the range between 2 and 2 to 125. So I think I didn't select the required value. So let's take a look at those details going back. So let me select. I think I changed this to 1. That's why this is given there. So, I mean, when you are creating for the first time, you might face these kind of issues. So that's why it is important to understand what is the right value, what is the requirement of application gateway before provisioning application gateway. So once the application gateway validation is passed, so you can say create. So I'm not going to create. So creation will take at least 5 to 10 minutes. So this is the WAP v2. So that's why it will take 5 to 10 minutes. But when I created long back the application gateway v1 took almost 40-45 minutes. The other pain is once you create the application gateway, at least the latest version is faster, but the previous versions used to take like at least 5 to 10 minutes for saving every single settings using the Azure portal. So that was my experience. But doing the same thing using the RM template is much faster as compared to the Azure portal. So that's why I would recommend to use the RM templates rather than using the Azure portal for creating these kind of Azure resources. Either you can use the RM templates or the PowerShell scripts. So those are the two ways to doing the through the coding. So let's create the resource to see how much time does it really take. So while this is getting created, I will walk you through the RM templates. So this is my RM template project. So if you are new to my series, you can look at the previous videos. I've already set up the RM template solution where I kept all my RM templates here. So in a folder sequence so that I can follow the dependency. For example, the first one is the resource group, then followed by the VNet and then app service environment. So this app service environment have the dependency on VNet, and then app service plan will have dependency on app service environment, and same thing, application gateway will have a dependency on VNet. So that's how the sequence, I maintain the sequence so that it is easy to manage the resources in the Visual Studio projects. So what I do is, like if I want to create another folder, so I simply copy paste the folder, copy and paste so that you get the new folder as it is with all these files, because you need all these files for any resource you create. One of the this file is used for actually provisioning these RM templates locally from your local host for the first time. And this is my actual RM template. And this is my parameter file for dev, parameter file for production, parameter file for test. So let's go to the template. So this is the RM template. Actually, I just copy pasted, but I'm just showing how I created the RM templates. So this is the RM template. As usual, I always start with adding all the custom tags in the parameter. And then this is my resource group name. So reading the resource name runtime. This is the name of the application gateway. So this value is the default, but this will go into the RM templates as the parameter. And then use these parameters depending on the stage you create in the Azure DevOps. And then this is the location. This is the application gateway size. So as I mentioned, using the WAP v2, and then these are the application gateway capacities. So you can, these are the allowed values, and you can add as many number of instances. This is the backend IP address. So if you are keeping this backend as a app services, you are going to keep the app service name. If you are using the application gateway for the VNet, then VNet, sorry, application gateway for the virtual machine. So virtual machine IP address will be specified here. And then WAF enabled, what is the default value? WAF mode. So there are two allowed values, detection and prevention. I'm using the detection, for example. WAF rule set type. So this is the WASP top 10 WASP rules. So there are 300 plus rules are included as part of the web application gateway. So I think I haven't shown that. So let me quickly go through the one which I already created. So in the configuration, is it in the configuration? So under the web application firewall, select the rules. These are the WASP 3.0 version latest rules. So it looks like the deployment is completed. So this is like 3 minutes, 3 to 4 minutes. So these are the different versions of WASP 10. So I see these two are added recently. Looks like I haven't seen those previously. So once you enable, these are the rules which are going to be used part of your application gateway. You can closely look at whatever is applicable, whatever is not applicable. For example, SQL injection, cross-site scripting, all these vulnerabilities. Whatever is applicable, you can select. Whatever is not applicable for your application, you may want to unselect. So the more you select, you understand the security. The more the security, you are compromising on the performance. So you need to keep the balance between what is applicable, what is not applicable. So going back to the RM templates, we discussed about the WASP top 10 rules in the portal. And then this is the WAP rule set version. So we saw the rules multiple versions. So you can select the 3.0, 3.1, 3.2. So you can keep this parameterized, and then public IP address. So you can either specify the IP address or the name in the public IP address. This is the name of the virtual network. So the tricky part when you are creating the dependency resources using the RM template, I'm not creating the virtual network as part of this RM template. I'm creating the application gateway and attaching this application gateway in the existing VNet subnet. So what you need is the VNet name and the subnet name where your application gateway is going to be placed, and then get the reference ID. So I'm getting the reference ID of the subnet, for example. So what you need to specify is the name of the resource group and the name of the provider, and then virtual network. Under that virtual network, this is a subnet where the application gateway is going to sit. So that's how you will get the reference ID of the subnet and use that reference ID in the application gateway while creating a resource. So this is the public IP address reference ID. So I'm creating these variables so that those variables will be used in the while creating the resources. So this is my public IP address resource creation. and this is the application gateway creation. So I've attached the tags here so that all the tags added as part of the parameter will be added into the application gateway. So you can specify the type, location. So this depends on the public IP address. So one more thing to note here is make sure that you should not include depends on the virtual network here. So this was a mistake I was doing. So when I got the error, you should include depend on only if you are creating the same resource part of the same RM template. As I mentioned, I'm not creating the virtual network part of this RM template. Rather, I will be using that virtual network. So I should not be keeping this as a dependency. That was the miscommunication. So since it is already created, I'm going to use that subnet in the properties. That's how you are going to attach or link the application gateway with the subnet in the virtual network. So that's the dependency here is only the IP, public IP address. And these are my properties of the application gateway. And then I attach the subnet here. So if you are going with the SSL, I was playing with the SSL, so I will make another video once I'm able to successfully attach the SSL certificate for the front end and the back end. But one of the property for the application gateway is attaching the SSL certificate or a trusted root certificate, or you can read it from the Azure keyword. So that's the best way to do it rather than attaching from here. And then front-end IP configuration, then front-end ports, the HTTP or HTTPS backend ports. So if you are new to the RM templates, the best way to start with understanding RM template for any of the resource is going to the Azure RM templates storage account place. So you can go to the Google, you can search Azure RM template storage account, and you can look into these details. Now you can search the service type. So I'm searching the application gateway that comes under the networking resources. So there are two sections here, bicep and the JSON format. So if you are completely new to Azure and trying to use the code-based Azure resource provisioning, so you can use the bicep. So I'm already created a couple of resources using the JSON, so I'm comfortable with the JSON, so I can select the JSON. Otherwise, if you are completely new, it is better to learn the bicep rather than the JSON. So this is the RM template script from the Azure Microsoft documentation. So you can find any of the resource here. To understand the RM templates, the maximum properties are added, all the properties, in fact, not maximum, and along with the description, so that you will understand what is required, what is not required. So rather than looking at the quick start RM templates, the quick start RM templates is also great, but sometimes I notice the quick start RM templates may miss some of the information which you are looking for may not be available there, not available there. So the best way to look at the latest information, for example, the version type here, the type, all these information, so the tagging, the identity, for example, in my case, I'm not using the identity, auto scaling. So here it will be mentioned the capacity, but if you are looking for the details, you can here see auto scaling configuration, application gateway auto scaling configuration for more information in the documentation for the auto scaling related information. So that's how you should be learning RM template script from the Microsoft MSD and documentation before creating this RM template script. So what else is needed? Backend HTTP settings. So whether it is the HTTPS or HTTP, the port numbers, and you also need the listeners. So listeners are the backend uh, backend pool listeners, and then you need the routing rules, and then finally you need the health probes. So health probes basically it helps for, it's kind of a health check for your application gateway. It keeps checking every 30 seconds whether the backend pool is healthy or unhealthy. So that report will be generated by health probe. So you will add those details part of the application gateway. So this is the application gateway RM template. So let's run this using the Azure, using the Visual Studio Code. I use the Visual Studio Code for running the RM templates instead of the Visual Studio. So this is my folder, application gateway, where all my resources are, RM templates are located. So deploy the application gateway, give the RM template file name. Now make sure that you are in the same folder where you're running the application gateway, and then run this file. This basically the deployment file, which basically runs and creates the. So I'm rerunning the same script again to make sure that the latest details are updated. So it is quicker because this is something I'm running but second time. So the resource is already created. So this is the tagging information. These are the resources information, which is overridden in the Azure portal. If I go back here, I should be able to see the deployment, the latest deployment in the activity logs. So the 4 minutes ago, 1 hour ago. So these are the different changes happened on the application gateway. Now let's take a look at how to automate these RM templates using the Azure DevOps pipeline. In order to automate these RM templates, log into the Azure portal, Azure DevOps. So we've already discussed some of these details, how to automate using the RM template. So I have the build pipeline created already. So this is my latest commit. So with the latest commit, I just updated some of the parameter information. For example, here I parameterized the resource group name, application name, also the application gateway size, also the capacity. For each environment, I have passed the different values. This is application gateway name in the dev. So I will be tagging with the dev, the capacity one. If I go to the production or the test, so I may have the different values. For example, in the test, I will say test, and in my test, I may need 2 instances. If I go to production, I may need 5 instances. So that's how you will manage the parameter values different for each environment. So I've already committed those changes here. If you want to look at, make sure that the script has all my latest files, go to the draft folder and look at the application gateway folder with all these parameters. So now the build for artifacts looks good. In the release artifacts, so what I have to do is edit the pipeline. As I mentioned, I've already explained the process for creating the CI/CD in the previous videos, so you can look at those videos in case if you are new. By the way, this is my website where I track all the details of my exercise, the lab work I'm doing here. So as part of the CI/CD pipeline, for example, deploy RM templates using the Azure DevOps pipeline. So you can look at some of these videos to understand how to create the CI/CD pipeline. So these RM templates are going to run in a sequence. This is incremental mode. First, we will create the resource group, then followed by the virtual network, and then followed by the app service plans and apps and etc. So now part of this exercise, what I have done is created the application gateway. So you can say this is the application gateway. So I will keep the same parameter. So this is in the dev stage. So what I'm going to do is I have to, so same resource group, dev resource group, location is West US. I need to change the parameter file instead of the app service plan. I'm going to select the application gateway RM template here. This is the application gateway RM template, and then the parameter file from the application gateway. So this is the dev parameter file. You can apply these parameter values even using the variables, but the adding in the parameter file will give more flexibility. So today you might be using Azure DevOps. Tomorrow you might be using some other CI/CD, so that your all the parameters, if you keep it in the parameter file, so that will give more flexibility. So that's how you can keep adding more and more RM template tasks in the existing build pipeline to run in the incremental mode. So I will do the same thing in the test and production slots. And then save the changes, and you can click on create new release. So I'm going to click on new release. So this is going to run all the tasks. So all the tasks for creating the network subnet, also the app service plan application gateway. So this may take some time, but that's how you are going to automate or add your RM template task in the existing CI/CD pipeline for creating the resources. That's all for this video. Just to recap what we have done, part of this exercise is created the application gateway using the Azure portal, also using the RM templates, and automated using the CI/CD pipeline. As I mentioned before, provisioning the application gateway, make sure that you understand the requirement of your application, understand the purpose of the application gateway. If you are new to application gateway, just look at the features of the application gateway. This basically, when the request coming from your website, that application gateway will filter those requests for preventing your vulnerabilities. So you need the public IP address. See, this is a public IP address configured in my DNS, so that browser send the request, and the DNS will solve that public IP address and send the request to the application gateway. So we need the listener's HTTP or HTTPS as per your backend. So your backend could be on premise, your backend could be the Azure, even in the Azure VMs, VMSS, or app services. So there are multiple options you can configure as a backend tools, and you define the rules for HTTP and HTTPS. So there are a lot to learn from the application gateway, how to do the auto scaling, zone redundancy, keeping the static IP address, how to look into all the firewall tools, what is required, what is not required. So all those things can be done in the application gateway. So that's all for this video. Thank you very much for watching this. In case if you are new, want to watch my previous video, so you can log into the iCode for you website. It's not login, so you can access it, and I've explained the course details and also the application requirement. So as part of this series, I'm going through this application architecture implementation using the Azure. So I've taken this as a case study so that I can implement all the Azure resources as per this architecture. So I've created the VNet, subnets, also created the web tier, app tier, and now I'm working on the application gateway. So in the future videos, I will be creating the databases. I will be working on the CDN and some of the custom name conventions, and most to fulfill the entire architecture of this application will be completed as part of the subsequent videos. So in case if you see the videos, these are my videos. I'm going with the sequence. If you see the video is playing slow, so you can use the playback speed and you can adjust as per your comfortable. Thank you very much.